Welcome back to Kapowich on Real Estate. This is a program dedicated to consumer protection within the residential real estate arena. We have back in the studio the famous, very famous Jackie Berry, and she brought her daughter with, I don't know how many last names you have, but what is your last name?
Beverly Gordon Gorowitz.
Okay, we gotta shorten that sooner.
Yes, my husband agrees.
Okay. Anyway, Jackie, you have been in the business for decades.
Yes.
Which forced Beverly to follow your footsteps? Is that what happened?
Well, in a roundabout way, yes. She did find an area of the condominiums that she really liked, and so she's been doing a great job with that. So.
Okay, this is an often neglected area where families who live in a planned unit development, if you've been speaking to the realtor boards forever, that there's a special assessment and they typically go for a number of items. Can you read the laundry list, for instance?
Well, they can go anywhere from replumbing to doing the electrical wiring behind the walls.
Right.
If it's a condominium, roofs, siding, maybe they need to re-landscape. Maybe they haven't refurbished their clubhouse for a number of years and it still has the green shag carpeting in there and hasn't come back yet.
Correct.
And so there's a lot of different reasons why the special assessments would happen.
Okay. Now the normal assessments, which people often say homeowner dues, and it's not a dues. As you mentioned in the past, it's not a membership where you can elect to pay the dues, right?
That's correct.
So oftentimes the real estate community refers to it as maintenance fees, but it's not just maintenance fees either.
It's called assessments, and it's basically the budgets are divided into two different functions. Mm-hmm. One is the operating, that's the day-to-day stuff, that's the water, the garbage, okay. And things of that nature, lighting, whatever is on the common area. And then they have the reserves. And the reserves are based on whatever that association has to maintain that has a 1 year to a 30-year life expectancy. And they have to have a reserve study or a physical inspection every 3 years on that so that they know what components they're responsible for, what the current life expectancy would be, okay. And then what it would cost today.
Mm-hmm. Now, we've mentioned in the past, we spoke before the show, Beverly, oftentimes the homeowner association, these assessments are artificially low for decades anyway, for years.
Correct.
And then if a homeowner gets in trouble financially, they might stop making those monthly payments to the homeowner association management company. Now that association is really in trouble.
They are, because they need the assessments collected 100% to meet the budget obligations.
Okay. Now oftentimes, for instance, in the Great Recession here, we might see in the listing it says buyer to pay past homeowner association fees of $5,000. So that means that homeowner's been in that unit not paying month after month, running up a bill of $5,000 worth of past assessments.
Correct. And what is a real misunderstanding is that it's a personal obligation of the owner that is owner of record at the time the assessments are levied. So they have to pay them, and if they don't, the association can sue them in small claims or superior court, depending on how much it is, or they can foreclose on the property.
Okay, that's a good point, because I think Jackie has mentioned this at her seminars, is that the real estate community as a whole probably feels that if the home goes into foreclosure, everything's wiped out and the management company is going to have to take that loss, or maybe the bank is going to pay it in a short sale transaction, but that's not the case?
That's not the case. And that is a conversation our office has many times with agents all day, actually, in our escrow department. And we encourage the agents to really be contacting the association in the beginning when they're taking that listing so they can find out how much is actually owed by the homeowner at that time, mm-hmm. and get the homeowner to get current, mm-hmm. because the assessments can be a problem when they're in the end of their short sale. They've negotiated everyone down to reduce their pricing, and then the association sitting there with a $3,000 assessment lien, that can stop the deal if the association's unwilling to work with.
At the last minute.
Work with them, yeah.
Okay. Let's connect the dots here. Jackie, you started a company where you would review these documents that the seller is mandated by state law to provide to the buyers,
That's correct.
right?
Yes.
And so typically that's done at the beginning of a transaction, hopefully, before a sale's been created, or often, in fact, what percentage are you involved? Is it the seller hires you or the buyer hires you? Is it
Well, we'd like to
50-50?
be hired by the seller because the seller is the one that's obligated to do the disclosure, and they sometimes don't know what's being passed on because they rely on the management company or the board of directors to provide them with a package that they think will protect them if something was to go wrong, and it doesn't. About 30% of our transactions are at the sales where they're listing the property, but the remaining is based on someone who's already purchased that property that wants to know what they've gotten themselves into.
Right. Okay.
And that we always tell them, you know, if you haven't talked to the association, you need to do that, because if it's in collection, you're going to need to negotiate at that level also. It's not just the documents that you have to pass on.
So that could be a tricky situation where Jackie does a review and sees that the homeowner association really is short in their reserves, say $2,700 per door of all the units in that community. And then, Beverly, you're contacted that the homeowner hasn't paid $3,700 worth of it.
Correct, and then we have to give a payoff demand to the escrow company, letting them know how much is outstanding. And a lot of time we get frustrated calls from the people that are involved in the transaction because they're seeing themselves not getting this deal through for $3,700. But that $3,700 means a lot to the association and to the members that are standing there left behind after that sale.
Right. I remember we've been interviewing Jackie forever, and she's been speaking at the real estate boards, that many of the homeowner associations were underfunded anyway.
That's correct.
Before the slowdown.
That's correct. Mainly because what happens is that the people who live there believe that I'm not going to be here when a new roof gets put on. And the truth is they're not paying for the new roof, they're paying for the roof they currently have that they're using.
That's correct.
And so that's the misnomer there, is that they often believe that they're paying for somebody else's roof and not forget that they're really paying for the time and the ownership of what they have now.
Right. So Beverly, we joked before the program here that it seems to me that homeowners vote to keep the assessments low.
Correct. They want them low because they know that that's on top of a mortgage payment. And also neighboring homeowners associations might have lower assessments, but the assessments aren't based on, they're based on the budget and what's actually covered. So they're not really comparing apples to apples, and that's a mistake.
Right. Most homeowners would think that, well, they're saving a few dollars here, but in the big picture, the value of their community is going down.
Correct. Yeah, they want to make sure that they are financially sound and that they're not going to move into the property and within a couple of years have a huge special assessment that they're looking at that can really jeopardize them being able to keep the property.
Now, I know we mentioned when I used Jackie Berry to review these documents, whether I represent a buyer, seller, as a real estate broker. Now, how is Beverly and your firm contacted? Who typically contacts you to get these assessments collected?
Well, most of the time we're contacted by the escrow company. However, if it's going to be a short sale, we'll receive phone calls from the realtors before we'll ever be contacted by an escrow company. They want to get their HUD-1 statements together.
Okay, so what is your business model? In terms, I know this is a family tradition. I'm waiting for your daughter to create a company that services the real estate community. So Jackie found a need and filled it. She's lauded in the industry that no one was really reviewing these documents and knew what was in the package. Then, now we go to assessments, where typically assessments just floundered, I think, and the homeowner association manager that has to be monitoring repairs is now involved in collections. Do they give that duty to you?
Correct. Yes, we'll pick up, starting with sending out a notice of intent to lien letter to the homeowner. We encourage the association to have their management company send out a courtesy letter first. A lot of associations will send out billing statements, or if they send coupons, they'll follow up, and if there's missed payments, they'll send them a statement. But then we encourage at least one courtesy letter to the homeowner, notifying them of the delinquency and giving them a time period before they'll be turned over to our office for collection. Because when we start, we're starting with what all the legal requirements are for doing the collection and placing a lien on the property, starting with a notice of intent to lien and then actually placing a lien against the property.
I see. So what is the time frame in terms of, do they have to be 90 days late or 30 days late? What is the time frame?
Well, the association has a collection policy that they'll have in place, and they also use their legal documents to see what's if there's any requirements there.
Okay.
And from the legal documents, they base their collection policy. We see policies that'll have 45 days for them to be delinquent, but that's far too soon for them to come into an office of collection. And from my opinion, I'd like to see them at 90 days because they've had several months to remedy the situation of being delinquent and possibly having that courtesy notice first, having that time period, and then if that expires, then they send them over to our office.
Okay. Now I know, Jackie, when you've looked at these documents that the seller has to provide to the buyer, you look on a preliminary title report
That's correct.
and go back and forth to the documents to match it up. If there's a notice to levy, how does that play out?
Well, what I'm looking for in the preliminary title report is recordings, because a lot of times the association will restate their governing documents, the title company won't pick them up, and so we get them to correct their title. We're also looking for those liens that the homeowner association has on, because in the state of California, if you go into foreclosure with your bank, that pretty much wipes out the fact that they will not come back on you, because we're a non-recourse state. However, with the liens for the association, that's not true. They don't have to release that lien unless it's paid off. So it can stay on that property even though the title companies will bond, what they call bond around it. That will still stay on there. So when that person maybe goes to try and get a second on their property or maybe refinance it, it could show up again. So it's like that little snake hiding in the grass that they don't really know about. And that is a personal obligation, like Beverly was saying. So it doesn't get wiped out. It doesn't get taken off of that account until it gets paid. So that's something that I would say that the realtors really need to be looking at. The agents need to be asking that question of their client, have you paid your assessments? And with the time that we're in right now, the amount of time that it takes for a bank to foreclose, they can be very seriously underfunded by not having paid their assessment. So that's something that you're going to want to negotiate with that association or with the collection company. And the only things that they're really willing to negotiate, if Beverly can correct me if I'm wrong, is basically late fees and penalties. They can't really give up those assessments because those are the funds that they need not only for the reserves but also for the day-to-day operation.
Oh, that's a good point. And Jackie's mentioned this in the past. If there is $10,000 due, and I've seen this in a listing where buyer to pay $10,000 in past assessments, there might be $2,700 in there of late fees and penalties, correct?
Correct.
Right.
And we encourage the association to look at resolving the matter and get the account paid through the escrow, but sometimes the board of directors aren't even willing to write off penalties, but most of them that we work with are willing to bring the account down, but they really are concerned about those regular assessments because that's going to pass on to all the buyers. If they come up short in their regular assessments, it's going to cause an increase for everybody else.
Right, and it's going to be hard to get other transactions through.
Correct.
Right. So let's review again. If there is a delinquency and you file, where do you go to the county courthouse and file a?
Right, we record them with the counties.
Okay. And what is that name of that document?
It's called a notice of assessment lien.
And then how do you do it by computer nowadays? You send somebody down and wait in line?
We send a courier. We print them from our office, and then we send couriers to the different counties to get them recorded.
And they wait in line at the county courthouse and pay the fee and record it? Okay.
Yeah.
Now, nowadays that the county courthouses are probably computerized, does that show up the next day on that property
I'm
or
not sure.
close to-
I'm not sure how fast they're showing up on their records,
Okay.
but we get them back within a couple of days.
And then you get confirmation that it's been
Confirmation.
recorded. Now, in terms of, now that might come out of the blue to a lot of people involved in this transaction, right?
The assessment lien?
Right.
It is, because I think people underestimate the gravity of having a lien against that property. It absolutely has completely stopped transactions from going through. And it has to be paid or negotiated to be able to have a release of lien, because the buyer and the lender, the new lender, want to have that encumbrance around the property gone. And the only way to release that lien is to have agreement either on a settled balance or a paid in full balance.
Okay, and that's where, because a lot of these distressed properties, they're negotiating, whether it's 20 cents on the dollar or 80 cents on the dollar, they think they might be able to do that with the special assessment, or the past due assessments.
To the rest of the membership, you mean?
Well, to that delinquent amount, realtors think, oh, that's no problem, we'll just
Oh.
offer them 50 cents on the dollar. Well,
Right.
that's probably not going to happen.
Right, and that's really only thinking for this one transaction, but that's not really taking into consideration the buyer you just put into that property that's going to have the increased assessments or a possible special assessment rolling down the pike, in a year or two down the line. And it's just absolutely not fair to the homeowners that are still there living in the association and paying those assessments for the people that are not paying.
Well, Jackie's alluded to this in the past, where that families might be living there using, having the trash taken away, using the pool, playing tennis, the common areas, and their neighbors are paying for it.
That's
They're
correct.
not there. So in fact, a lot of people that we've interviewed, the attorneys say, if you're not making your mortgage payments, the least you can do is always pay those special assessments.
We love those attorneys that say
Yeah,
that.
okay.
We agree. They should be paying at least their homeowners' assessments. If they're not going to pay their mortgage, then they at least need to be paying that, because the mortgage is going to be remedied. But the homeowners' assessments aren't going, if they're not remedied, then we're going to go after them personally.
Okay, I think it's safe to say the real estate community and the public has the opposite feeling, that the first thing to go away is the maintenance fee, this
Right.
association fee.
Because it's the lowest fee.
Okay, so let's speak about if there's a short sale transaction, the home is underwater, they owe a lot more than it's worth, and there's a transaction that you're involved in. How does that close? I think you alluded to that, Jackie. That can close without those arrears being paid. Do you see that happening, and then you go after that homeowner later? Or is that only
On
in
the
a
short sales, no.
No, that has to be done in a short sale for
Right.
sure, but in a foreclosure, that's where they go back after the...
Individual homeowner, right.
Correct,
Okay.
because they want the release of lien. In order to get the release of lien, there has to be agreement from all parties on
Okay.
getting that paid. We have some associations that will do a partial satisfaction on the loan, or on the assessment. So let's say that there's $5,000 owed and they can only bring $2,000 in to the short sale. The association wants the remaining $3,000 paid then outside of escrow in payments.
And so the banks will sign off on that, the new buyer's bank.
Right. The banks have to be in agreement on it, and it's going to show up on the HUD-1 statement, and it's definitely a concern for the parties, and of course the sellers want it just to be gone. But the association board of directors is mindful for the remaining homeowners that are behind, because that remainder of the balance has to be picked up by somebody, and the bailout plan are the remaining homeowners there.
Correct. Now, in terms of in a short sale, the past due amount has to be paid.
Correct.
What percentage do you see where the seller's bank pays it? 0, 50%?
Not often.
Not
They want to pay pennies on the dollar, if anything. We wish the banks would step to the plate and really help these associations, because all they're doing is leaving a financial mess for the association members, and it skews their delinquencies. It increases, it forces these special assessments, And it really makes it more difficult for the lenders to come back around and to loan within these own projects that they're, you know,
Right.
foreclosing or
Right.
short selling.
Right, Jackie's mentioned that in the past. Jackie, when you see on a foreclosure, let's say the property's been foreclosed, and that, let's say $5,500 in past dues were not, past assessments were not paid. Now, the foreclosed seller is responsible for that, but is that still going to show up then on the preliminary title report, or is that?
Generally speaking, only if there's a lien. If the association has placed a lien on the property, then it will show up. But what happens is that when we get that, the association has to split the account. So anything that went with the previous owner goes with that previous owner, and the bank takes from the day that they take possession, and they start making the payments forward until they sell it.
I see.
The big thing that I think that we want to bring to everybody's attention is that this is not only a personal obligation, but when they go to court and they get a judgment, it then goes against their credit.
Oh, good point.
It'll go against their credit. It will show up until somebody decides they want to come back and pay it. It's good for what, 10 years, Bev?
10 years and it's renewable, and there's 10% interest on a judgment.
Wow. So on a short sale, we know it's going to be paid, but either by the buyers and the sellers or the agents, but it's going to be paid before it closes, or it will not close.
Right.
Okay.
Absolutely. And we're seeing that some of these homeowners, the sellers, are being given relocation fees. So we've seen the relocation fees $3,000 to $5,000 being paid to a seller that's asking the association to reduce their account.
Oh, wow. Now, in terms of the foreclosure, once it goes to foreclosure, I think a lot of the real estate community feels that, oh, the bank's going to wipe everything out.
They only wipe out that portion that was previously owned. But remember, we talked about it being a personal obligation, so it really doesn't go away.
It doesn't wipe it out. What it does is when they're talking about extinguishing or wiping out, what they're talking about is the assessment lien. And the assessment lien is the vehicle to be able to foreclose. So all it did was eliminate the association's ability to foreclose the property because it's already been foreclosed. But the personal obligation remains alive and ready to collect
On the past seller.
on the past due assessments.
But the bank now has a new life with that property
That's right.
and can sell it free and clear
They can.
and start with a new buyer.
Yes.
Okay.
That lien does sneak in, though, because I've seen it where a year later, after someone has bought a piece of property that went from foreclosure to them,
Uh-oh.
and all of a sudden they want to go refinance or they want to go out and buy a car, and that little lien sneaks in and shows up on their credit report. So
Well, the lien's not showing up on the credit report. The lien is wrapped around the property, and what happens is that the lien will stay on the property because according to the law, the association's only required to release a lien if it's paid in full. And a foreclosure extinguishes the lien, but it's not paid in full, so we leave the lien on the property. We don't release the lien.
So it'll stay there until the past seller pays it off.
Correct. Or it's negotiated with that past seller, or if the buyer wants to pay the bill to get the release of lien formally taken off. But as Jackie said, the title companies can bond around that lien, and they can get their property transactions through by doing that.
Now, what typically in the transaction, if a transaction's 30 days or 40 days, do you get involved in the last 5 days, or what percentage are you usually at the beginning of the transaction instead of the end of it?
Well, we're not seeing transactions close that fast, and
Well, that's true on a short sale.
oh
It'd be a
my
long
gosh,
one, yeah. I'm
they
thinking
last
on-
a long time,
That's
and
true.
they go through sometimes several buyers. So it takes time. We don't usually get contacted unless the real estate agent is keen on the assessments and they know what's happening and they want to put it on their HUD-1 statement. So whenever that transaction takes place for the agents is when we'll usually get a phone call.
Okay, that brings up a good point, because nowadays agents are trying to get a HUD-1 statement. That's the Housing and Urban Development form, the federal form, from the escrow company to provide to the bank,
Correct.
right? And so once that's a mechanism where now they have to talk to the homeowner association and find out, oh, how much do they owe? And then
Right.
that's when they find out?
Yes, and that's when they find out, and then they get a little upset if it's a high amount, but some homeowners are in the association not paying for several years. And the association is just wondering, when is the bank going to foreclose? What's going on? There's a lot of board meetings that are taking place where they're continually talking about the same properties and waiting and monitoring those lender foreclosures. We do that for them. We'll monitor those for them, but we're seeing notice of defaults recorded and them expiring after a year and not having any sale transaction taking place. We're calling them shadow foreclosures, where I don't think the lenders want the properties either.
Right.
And so they're choosing which properties they're actually going to proceed with, and we have a lot they're not.
Yeah, this is the tough ramification of all that is that those homeowner associations are sitting for a year or two not getting paid.
Yeah, and we are having amounts where the association doesn't even qualify to go into small claims, because the small claim limits for an association is 2 at $5,000 in a year, or multiple at $2,500.
I got it.
But we're out of that range. We're in Superior Court.
Right.
More than $5,000. We have $10,000, $15,000
Jeez.
transactions where we'll have short sales coming to us wanting to settle a $10,000 debt for $1,000.
Right.
Just can't happen.
That's not going to happen.
No.
Okay, so in closing, make sure that the homeowner always pays that maintenance fee, the special assessment,
Correct.
as well as a monthly assessment.
Absolutely. And if they're finding out that it's delinquent, they need to start paying it and get onto a payment plan and get it paid down so that it doesn't have to be so bad when they actually get to the sale.
Great. Beverly, thanks for coming out.
Thank you.
Jackie, good to see you again.
Nice seeing you too, Pat. Thanks.
Thanks again. We will see you next week. Take care.